Hi, Melanie, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Nice to see you.
Yes, thank you. Trying to figure out how do I rename myself. It's always in a different spot. Oh, it's up here. There it is. Ooh, nice slow fade in.
I actually probably need to turn a little bit more light on. Hold on a second.
There we go. And we'll pull this over here so it doesn't look like I'm staring off into space all the time. Are you here in town or are you elsewhere?
I am here in town. I was traveling frequently between October pretty much through all of January, but I'll be stationary for the next couple of months.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm kind of like you. It comes in lots and lots and lots for a couple months and then nothing.
Right. So this is my first New England winter. I've lived here 8 years and climate change has made it really warm. This is the most snow I've seen in the wintertime here
What do you think?
and the coldest. So the snow hasn't been that bad because I do remember seeing this area in the news before I moved here where you guys had those really tall uh,
Oh yeah, yes.
mountains of snow.
Yes,
Uh, but I'm thankful living here in Nahant, we don't get as much snow as the mainland. Like I
right.
was shocked, even just looking at the parking lots over in Bennon Square and seeing how much snow is over
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
It's a little shocking.
Yeah. I don't know. It starts to wear thin after a while,
Yeah.
It's
Barbara.
worn thin.
Yeah, well, you're escaping, so
Yeah, and we need to talk about possibly
yes. Oh, we,
rescheduling.
we yes, that's the first thing we're going to talk about.
Good. Hi, Melanie.
Hi, Barbara. How are you?
You didn't grow up with this kind of stuff either. Well, you did, New York.
New York, yeah. But I moved here from Tennessee.
Right.
And as I was sharing with Bob, I've been here 8 years, but the winters have been so mild. Like I feel like this is truly my first New England winter.
And I had forgotten how, because they had been so nice,
Mhm.
I thought we'd moved into the good part of global warming. And then this winter it's the snow has been there and the ice. I've fallen. I mean, and you have to go up a hill
Hmm.
and then you have to come down and you're that you've got a lot of ice there.
Yeah,
No good.
yeah.
Oh,
I miss my walks.
ditto, ditto. I haven't been out because I
Get a
still.
dog.
Do you have crampons?
I
That's
should have crampons.
yeah. That's what I hear you should get for this kind of weather.
Hmm.
But
I may
still,
have some up in the attic, like stashed in the box with all the old winter gear.
Yeah. Hi, Dan.
Good evening.
let me turn my printer off. I'm not printing all 100 pages of it all. I just printed the summary.
Oh,
I'm assuming, are we going to put some of it up on the screen? The
it,
budgets.
oh, it's Tony's show,
Right.
and I think it's going to be more of an overview
Okay.
than to dig into all of the detail.
Okay. Because it's like 75 pages.
Yes,
It
it's a lot.
is 75 pages. It's not like.
Hmm. Tony said he would be here. Peter said he would be here. Tim said he would be here. Deborah, I don't know.
She's been having trouble with her computer.
Mm.
I mean, I think she will try to come, but she's been spending much time, maybe that's with tech consultants and get things fixed. No fun.
Okay. Well, speak of the devil,
Here she is. Okay,
here
good,
they both are.
good.
I'm here as well.
Yay. Welcome, Peter. Welcome, Deborah.
There you are. Some light. There.
What? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. We're missing Tim. Well, while we wait for Tony, let's see, it's 6:33, and we do have a quorum. So present from the Finance Committee, Bob Vanderslice, Melanie Drayton, Barbara Beatty, Dan McMacken, Deborah Warren, and Peter Barba, which is more than a quorum. So we are in order. And let's just do like the administrative stuff first. So an announcement, Joy has officially resigned.
Okay.
So we're now short 2. So it's a 7-member committee for at least the near future. Dan, you look like you want to say something.
No, I'm just listening. We're down 2, so I'm just wondering which moderator is going to fill the holes.
I don't
And
know.
we may be down more because Peter
Yeah.
is running.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Good point, Barbara.
Yeah, I pulled papers. I'm getting signatures, so I don't know if anybody's running against me. Hopefully not. That'll save a little bit of aggravation or, spending money or whatever. But yeah, I do know that I did speak to Dave, actually just a couple of days ago, and I don't know if he had received a letter on Joy, but I do know, obviously, he knew his son was no longer on the committee. And he did say he was going to try and fill all of the positions that were open before the election day. So I don't know if what he's working on. I do know, I do the Veterans Food Bank with Dana Sheehan, and I think Dana is interested in getting back on FinCom.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yes, please.
yeah. Great, especially since he knows what we do and he knows how to do it. And he tends to dig into things a little bit more. And,
But he spots stuff like
yeah,
he'll-
exactly. Yeah. He's very good. He's very, diligent at finding things. So,
Yeah.
so if Dave doesn't appoint him, then I probably will if I get elected.
Okay. And your intent is to continue on FinCom through this season, through town meeting.
As I understand it, I would probably have to resign upon being sworn in as moderator. I think that's
Yeah.
how it would work. So
Yes.
yes, I would not be available for town meeting, but my intent is to stay on until election. So by then, hopefully all
No,
this
wait,
stuff is done, right?
If you win the election, are you the moderator for this upcoming town meeting?
Yes.
Oh,
So yeah, exactly.
I got it.
So it's one of those things that yeah, it's going to be nerve-wracking. Dave did say that the Massachusetts Moderators Association, Mass Moderators Association does kind of do a quick training for all of the new moderators because it is election season and it is town meeting season. So hopefully I get a little bit of training.
Well, just going to town meeting is training, I think.
Yeah.
But I can imagine it's very different from the moderator's perspective than.
Yeah. I don't have to vote on anything unless it's a tie. Either to make a tie or break a tie.
Yeah, yeah, but just, controlling the meeting in a fair, balanced way, that can be hard.
Well, I have to, the one thing I have to say is that obviously I've gone to a lot of town meetings over the past, bunch of years, and Dave was really good. I mean, so, like one of the things, he keeps mentioning the book that he reads, the town meeting time. I'm obviously going to read that like he does religiously. But I'm also going to go back and look at some town meetings the last couple of years and just see, and again, everything's kind of scripted. So as long as there's no weird things, and it's funny because I did ask Dave if he would be at town meeting, and he said just because I'm stepping down at moderator doesn't mean I'm leaving town. So he'll be there, and he said, you have counsel. There is not only Dan Script, but the other counsel that kind of represents the town is right there. So if you're stuck, you just ask them and they help. So yep. Cool.
Hey, Peter, keep a tight rein on those people at the open mic, okay?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yes.
Unless the person speaking is Deb Warren.
I never go up there. I can think of a couple though that I would say keep a really tight rein.
Yeah, I know.
We know the culprits.
Yep.
Okay. While we're on that topic, Dave Conlon does have a bunch of copies of town meeting times.
Yep.
So if you are interested, I guess probably the easiest thing to do is just, well, yeah, send Dave an email and ask him if you could have one of those copies, and then copy me on the email too. So that if nothing happens, I'll know how many we need. Okay, so Joy resigned. All right, the meeting next week, the 27th, which I believe we are to talk about
Fire and police.
fire and police. I know there's a bunch of people that are going to be in someplace warm. And I'm really worried that we will have a quorum. And even if we did have a quorum, that's an important topic and it needs a good audience or a good attendance. So I think we have two options. One, since everybody seems to be going to someplace warm, we could hold our meeting in Miami. Thank you for that.
I'm not that far away. Fort Lauderdale's a little trip, but not too bad.
Okay, well, I should ask for a motion. No. My suggestion would be we do two meetings in the following week. So that's the week of 10th. Hang on. I need a calendar.
It couldn't be that late, could it?
No, it's the week of the 3rd. I'm sorry. It's
Right,
the
it's the
week
week of the 3rd.
March the 3rd. So we'd have our Thursday meeting, the 6th, which is kind of the one that everybody knows about. And then I would just suggest Tuesday night, the 4th. So basically move the Thursday, the 27th meeting to March the 4th, Tuesday, March the 4th.
That works for me.
Does that work?
I think I have to check when my flight gets in, but I think I get in around 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Let me just go check my calendar.
I actually get in at 8:30 on the 4th.
And in the evening, right?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah. Yep. So I wouldn't be able to attend.
What about it? Is the
The
5th?
sixth is fine.
How about
Yeah.
the 5th?
I could do Wednesday the 5th too.
So can I.
So maybe the 5th is better?
Yeah.
Dan, Melanie?
Fifth
So
works.
we would do March 5th and March 6th.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
That works.
Okay.
Because Dan and I are meeting with fire and police tomorrow, fire, Austin, and on Monday we're meeting with Tim.
Yep.
So we'll have met with them, but we need to tell them
Yes.
when. So
Yep.
would it be on Wednesday the 5th? Should we tell them?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, good. So I will get those posted. And how do I make the calendar go away without losing the meeting?
Now I have to make sure that we have to make sure that they can come that day. I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah, exactly.
I'll email them tomorrow. I'll email them tomorrow. We're going to see Austin tomorrow, but I'll email them both tomorrow to make sure they can come on the 5th.
Okay. Austin is here. We could
Oh,
just ask him.
Hi, hello everyone. Yeah, I believe I'm available on the 5th.
yeah.
Excellent. There.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we are still waiting on Tony. Before we absolutely guarantee the 5th, though, I want to make this thing go. All right, so on Wednesday the 5th, there's no other meeting scheduled right now, so we might be okay. All right. Hmm. Just hate to say it this way, but like chat amongst yourselves here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna try to call Tony.
Yeah, because this isn't like him. He would normally be here and
Yeah, we're 15 minutes late.
yeah.
Hey, Bob.
Hey there, how are you?
Good. How's it going?
Good, thank you. Can you join us?
Was it? Oh, it's 6:30?
Yeah.
You're jumping on right now. Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
At my desk. Oh, my God. Sorry.
You don't have to turn on your camera. You don't have to.
Jumping on right now.
All right, see you in a minute. Yay.
Now I shouldn't say this because I've already done it and Bob, you've done it, but MINUT.
I said I would do it.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
What?
Many thanks in Spanish.
Say again?
Muchísimas gracias.
Grazie mille.
Yeah,
Which is thank you very much.
right.
Vielen Dank.
Sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. I thought it was a 7 o'clock start. I'm sitting here doing emailing and stuff, and thanks for calling me, Bob. Sorry about that.
No worries. And we somehow we've got Tim in the process. Hi, Tim.
Hey there.
Real quick, Tim, to bring you up to speed. Let's see. Joy Bartlett has resigned from the committee. And there's lots of folks that are not available next Thursday, the 27th.
Including me.
including you. So we discussed either holding it in Miami, which we decided was not a good idea, or we're moving it to March the 5th, Wednesday, March the 5th. So there will be two meetings that week, March the 5th and March the 6th.
Okay,
Okay?
that works.
That's the thumbnail catch up. And let's see, Tony, I'm just gonna, the floor is yours here. So I think
Right.
an introduction similar to what you did for the selection.
Yeah, I'll start with the warrant. So everyone on the call, there's no one new on the call, right? You guys are familiar with the reoccurring articles.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll skip through the reoccurring ones. Yell pass if you want me to stop and revisit something. But Article 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are all your standard first 5 articles that we do every year. Article 6 is unique. So, and I'll try to explain more of this as we talk about the omnibus budget. But we have about $350,000 less in free cash this year. Remember, last year and years prior, we enjoyed a large amount of free cash because of ARPA money offsets and recovering unpaid taxes from 9 Little Nahant Road. So we had like absurdly large amounts of free cash. Around, now we're back to that 800,000 range, which is, actually typical, or really where our size budget we should be. With that being said, we obviously have capital needs and desires that we otherwise wouldn't be able to fund unless we are successful with Article 6. Article 6 is actually rescinding a vote of last year that appropriated $370,000 for phase 1 of the water meter replacement project. Remember, we talked about doing that over like a 3-year period. That 370 is separated between 200,000 of free cash and 170 from water retained earnings. Now, new to the town this year, and all towns, is a lead service inventory requirement, lead water service line inventory requirement. And what that is basically it comes from Detroit or Flint, Michigan, from the federal level through the state to all communities. You have to inventory all your water service lines and identify where potential lead material exists. And we have to do this from now until 2027. And in 2027, the requirement on all municipalities is that from moving forward, you're going to have to discover and or replace 10% of your unknowns moving forward. So the big push for us is to minimize how many unknowns we have in town. The reason I explain that to you is that the water meter project layers into this. MWRA reached out to us because of how many unknowns we had. And a lot of those unknowns are actually your water service line. The town owns from the main to the valve, which is like by the property line. And then you own from the valve into your home. So we have a decent amount of unknowns on the town side, but we have a significant more amount of unknowns on the resident side. And our idea is that with the water meter replacement project, when we go into the home to replace the water meter, we can investigate the material of the service line coming into the house.
Oh.
And MWRA is saying, through the 0% interest loan program, you guys have the authority and the capacity to fund the entire project in one swing. It's zero interest, so there's no negative financial element to it. And you'll be able to do that project faster. And by doing that faster, you'll be able to update your unknown list for the lead service inventory project faster. So rescinding this, rescinding the article from last year does not risk the project. In fact, we're putting the project on a faster track and doing it through the zero interest loan program. But what this does is it gives us $370,000 to use this year, which satisfies some of the capital requests that we received that we would, like I said, would otherwise be unable to fund this year unless we thought about potentially borrowing for them.
So is it fair to say that we're not rescinding the project, we're only rescinding the previous funding mechanism?
Exactly.
Yep. And where does it go when it's rescinded? Does it go back where it came from? So if 200 came from free cash, does 200 drop
Yes.
to?
Yes.
Okay.
So you'll see later in the warrant, the $200,000 in free cash that we'd be pulling back, we're recommending that it be used for library capital needs. And I'll explain that for you too. And then the 170 in retained earnings for underwater, 100 of it will use for a DPW water truck, and the other 70 would just remain in retained earnings for future year use.
And is there another article authorizing the 0% borrowing?
Yes, we are allowed to borrow, we are allowed to authorize up to 500,000 on an annual basis. So we put that in every warrant. We don't always borrow it right away, but it just helps us build that total capacity through the program. So you'll have, there's an article later that is for the $100,000 for the DPW truck, which is made possible if Article 6 is approved. And then you won't see an article for the library here because library also went to the CPC for borrowing for their capital needs. And the idea is that it'll be combined into that one article. So that one article will, once we get the CPC articles, there'll be an article for the library that will say appropriate, X amount for these projects, and X amount's going to come through CPC, and 200,000 is going to come from free cash.
Tony, but the 370, instead of being money that's already been appropriated, now basically gets turned into a no interest loan that we're obligated to repay the principal of.
Yeah, even more. So the water meter project, we estimate to cost $800,000 to $1 million, $800,000 to $1 million. So our approach previously was we'll fund it out of free cash and retain earnings a little bit at a time over a 3-year period. The new method that we're seeking is to just borrow for the entire cost through the zero interest loan program, and then we'll pay that debt down over time.
So as this money becomes available or gets reshuffled, do we know what it's going to cost to inspect the existing pipes for lead? Because that's the new demand on us by the state.
Well, our hope is that our goal is to basically get to zero unknowns before 2027.
And can you talk to how this overlays with the ongoing efforts to increase the line diameters, which would allow us to reduce the basic water pressure, which is up to 90 psi, twice what a lot of towns have, which was an ongoing project. I think we were doing some amount every year.
They don't really overlap with each other. That's kind of a separate water mission
Yeah, but if you're replacing all the pipes, like you just finished Emerald Road,
It's a
I have
known
to,
pipe.
I have to know, yeah, I'd have to say that everything along Emerald Road is known, other than maybe the hookups into the individual residences. And
Exactly. So for Emerald Road, for households on Emerald Road, we're able to say that we know it's not lead from the main to the valve.
right,
Then we look at your property record, your property cards. If your house was built after 1988, we know that there's no lead on the house side because that's when the lead law went into play. If your house was built prior to 1988, then we look at our tie card information and see if we have the material identified on that. If it isn't, then we will solve the equation when we go to replace your water meter. We'll check for what the material is coming into your house. And that'll complete the puzzle, from main to your home.
And if
All
it
right.
turns out that's a lead pipe, what happens then?
Right.
Yeah, then there is the state is going to be offering grant programs for to remove the lead. It's tricky. I tried to ask them about that because technically it's not town property, it's resident
Right. Yeah.
owned. And they said basically unless you pay for it, the resident's not going to do it. So
so they're
basically,
putting grants in for residences to be able to eliminate lead pipe from, their drinking water.
yeah, it would be for the town would apply for the grant, or maybe a borrowing, a low interest loan program of some sort where the town would go after that and then actually do the work for the resident. Honestly, I don't think we're pretty confident that we don't have a lot of it. That we're mostly dealing with copper or galvanized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I have brass in my house, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So
Never heard of such.
And so you'll be getting letters. We have to send letters out. We were working on updating our website and updating our inventory spreadsheet. So you'll be getting letters that say part of or all of your service line is unknown. The material is unknown. We suspect that it is not lead, but we don't have documentation that confirms that it isn't. And you can look at this database to determine what your status is and all that. It's a big push all the way from, well, actually the federal government down. So that's the other element of this is who knows if it will stay in place under the current administration. So
Yep. Is the inspection just a visual inspection of the pipe that's visible?
yes, yep.
So it's not a whole lot of effort then.
No, actually, we're even putting on the website a way residents can actually inspect the service line coming into their home, and just by looking at it, you should be able to tell what material it is, and you can provide photographs to the town, and then we can update the database based on that information. They do scratch tests as another thing. But for us, we don't like going into your home if we don't need to. And since we're going to have to do the water meter project,
Yep.
we said we'll just look at it then.
Yep, that makes sense.
So Tony, I recall at some point, and it was most likely not a conversation that we had with FinCom. It was something I think you and I spoke about, and that was, and I'm only bringing it up because it would relate to obviously other costs within the town or whatever. Is the town looking at hiring a plumber to be on staff for the town?
For the water meter project?
Yeah, well, you had talked about the possibility of getting a town plumber, not like a company, but hiring somebody who we'd retain afterwards to
Oh,
be
yeah, for some
on.
cost savings.
Yeah,
on that. Yeah, that's still an option. But we talked, yeah, you and I talked about that as far as like when you actually do the install. You know, hiring an outside contractor at prevailing wage, you know, is pretty costly. Versus if you hired a plumber on staff and had them and paid them at a salary rate in order to do the project. But in speaking with our water engineering company, right, Pierce, they were saying that there's a lot of other elements to the project, to the scope of work for that contractor, you know, it's the material gets delivered in a Connex box. It's a lot of like detailed data recording that gets inputted into the system. You also have to record the meter that's coming out and the last
right.
reading and make sure it gets added in. So it sounds like it may be a little bit more complicated than us doing it in-house.
Okay.
So for this article, I gotta work on some talking points to make it as simple and brief as possible. But the general idea here is we're taking money from last year, bringing it into this year so we can spend it on other needs of the town and shifting the funding source for the water meter project to the zero interest loan program and
What I'm a little
program
still
fast.
confused about is I thought you said the water meter project was 1 million, maybe a little bit north of 1 million, but we only have 500,000 available through the zero interest loan. Where's the other piece coming?
No, so every year we've authorized about $500,000.
Oh, so we just have this giant slug of authorization sitting there?
Honestly, I think we have somewhere about like currently, I think MWRA told me it was like 1.1 or $1.2 million in authorization that we haven't utilized yet. And
Okay.
then this extra 500,000 here will bring it to like 1.6. Basically, what we do is we'll always ask for the authorization at town meeting, and then we will program water projects through that. And depending on what the estimated cost of those projects are, we try to like fit it into an annual capital approach. So
And how long do we have to repay the principal portion?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'll have to get that back to you on that. What's the payback period?
I do hope it requires an annual payment.
I think it does, but
So-
I don't know like how, is it a 5-year term or is it, is that what you're asking me?
Is it
Yeah.
10 or 30?
Yeah.
The other question is though, when we're doing an article like that, could we put in annual payments must be made? Like, can we put that in the verbiage anytime we do a borrowing article that, like, and I'll bring up the Coast Guard housing as a perfect example. And Tony has some great news about Coast Guard housing, but I won't steal his thunder.
Already did.
What's that?
You already did.
Oh, well, but I'm thinking, like that loan, we could have been putting something to that loan for the last, and I don't know, it's a 2% or less than 2% interest rate. Maybe we don't pay it early, but I just feel that if we're paying something down, even if it's the minimum, we're putting ourselves in better shape. So I mean, I don't know. You thoughts on that, Tony? I don't know.
The way that we don't, so Allison would be way better at explaining this than me. She's the mastermind when it comes to debt, but the way that I understand it is we're authorized. We get authorization for borrowing for a number of different projects. But the way that the town of Nahant does its borrowing is we combine all those authorizations and we go out for one short-term ban a year.
Right.
And then we pay principal down on an annual basis and then go out for another short-term borrowing the following year. That may include some of the leftover amounts from the previous year that weren't paid down in principal that year. And what that approach does is it saves interest. It saves interest burden on it versus doing like a long-term borrowing, a 30-year bond or something like that.
Right. Right.
So it's Allison, I asked her, what's your thought on that approach? Do you like that way or do you think that we should be doing more long-term borrowing or whatever? And she said, some towns, only do long-term, some towns only do short-term, some towns do a combination of the two. That's how Marblehead did it. It was like a combination of the two. But she said for the town of Nahant, the way that the town's been doing it, the way that we've been doing it for years, it makes the most sense. It saves the town the most amount of money.
Okay.
Paying down the most amount of principal. It's the best financial approach for the town. That was her take. So
Do you
If it
not
ain't broke,
do
don't
a-
fix it.
yeah,
Do you not do a float to fix mechanism? So you're just short-term interest rates continuously?
I believe that's for the most part. Yeah, it's a rolling like short-term borrowing on an annual basis.
And the other question I was going to ask, did you not propose using the borrowing for the water meters last year because at that point they weren't eligible, or is that what changed?
We just, instead of borrowing for it, and at the time, I think we were planning on using MWRA borrowing for some water main projects. And we hadn't had this lead service line requirement put on us yet.
No, I understand that, but you say that we have like a 1.2 million-ish outstanding capacity to borrow under the MWRA program. We had most of that last year.
Yeah, we would have like 600 last year.
Yeah.
At that time, going to town meeting to ask for another 5. So yeah, I don't know. I think we had a lot of free cash and we had a lot of retained earnings, and we felt like that was the best approach was to use it instead of borrow for it. But
I'm all for spending less and not borrowing. Even at zero interest, I'm still for spending less and not borrowing. But I just wanted to know why the change.
I don't remember why we didn't pursue the zero interest loan program last year versus using the cash that we decided to go after. But I can tell you, as far as why the change, this lead service inventory requirement is the catalyst for it. It's why, like, MWRA called us to ask about why we had so many unknowns. We explained to them how we planned on discovering those unknowns through the water meter project over a 3-year phased approach. And they said, well, why don't you do it all in 1 year? Just get it done. You got the capacity and it's zero interest. And that way, then you can spend the other 2 years, solving any other unknowns on your town side if you need to. So that's really the lead service line is, I think, really the most of the reason as to why we're switching gears. But the other part of it is that, instead of borrowing for the DPW truck this year and either saying no or borrowing for the library capital needs, we're able to, changing gears here, it lets us use free cash for those efforts too.
But essentially, what we're doing is we are transferring appropriated monies to a new water truck and taking on incremental debt that is interest free, where we must repay the principal.
Yes.
Now, does the purchase of the water truck come up as its own freestanding article that
Yeah.
that could be voted up or down?
Yes.
So, do we have any idea of what the lead inspection will cost?
No, not at this point. Right now, we are, going through I think so far we've spent about $15,000 on putting together our inventory, evaluating, thousands of tie cards and property records. We brought a consultant in to help us with that, developing these letters and website and all this stuff that they're putting on us. And we used the little left of ARPA money that we had for that project. So I think, that question, Dan, is variable based on how many unknowns you have. And so we'll know better once we complete the water meter replacement project, what that number really is.
And that would be dealing with the components from the headers to the households. That's the thing that the water meter replacement will tell us. That'll tell us the last 10 yards of the pipe.
Yeah, from the valve into the house. So our unknown percentage is based on the complete service line. So if we don't know the town side of your service line, or we don't know the resident side of the service line, or we don't know either, it counts towards our total unknown. So even if we, like Emerald Road, are able to say, we know that the water main to the valve is not lead, those houses on Emerald Road that we don't know from the valve to the house still count as an unknown. Once we do the water meter replacement project and can confirm the material coming into the house, then we would know the material, the entirety of the service line.
What do you see happening should the downstream articles for spending on a $100,000 truck or the CPC monies for the library, let's say those are not approved? Then what happens? We've rescinded 6, and we can't move forward with that plan, and then those available funds are sitting in limbo.
Well, if 6 doesn't get approved, then our plan would be to amend the motion for the later article regarding the DPW truck and recommend borrowing the $100,000 for it.
No, I'm saying the opposite. What if 6 is approved and the money is rescinded? Then
it would just drop. I guess that money would just drop to free cash and retained earnings if you don't appropriate it. And it would just drop to free cash and it would be available to us next year.
Thank you.
Or we could add to the reserve fund.
All right. Any other questions on this one, on 6?
Well, I just want to say that I'm very glad you're bringing up the library need, because to take what we're saying is we're going to take some of this if this gets rescinded, some of the money we'll have there will go to that really desperate library capital expense because the ceilings are falling, et cetera, right?
Yeah, so library went to CPC for
I know,
envelope, for like the building envelope work.
right.
They came to us. They actually requested the same from us, but told us that they were seeking that portion from CPC. And additionally to that, they asked us for funds for
Electrical,
electrical, like replacing the old knob and tube electrical and upgrading the service.
right,
And also upgrading their fire alarm system.
right,
And they also asked for some funds for a like security system.
right.
The three of those things add up to more than $200,000. I don't think I felt like the security system was more of a want than a need and could be pushed off to a later year. But I do understand the importance of the electrical upgrade and the fire alarm system upgrade. I think that their projected or their estimated cost on the fire alarm upgrade is a little high. So even though the two of those things add up to more than just a little bit more than 200,000, I think $200,000 should do it. And by combining it with the other article through the CPC that calls out the total amount of money for all of these items to be separated by the CPC money and the free cash. If the envelope work ends up costing more, they could use some of that free cash for those cost overruns or vice versa. You know,
Good to hear. Yeah,
if the electrical work or the fire alarm work exceeded the 200,000, they could use some of the CPC money for that. As long as it's falls under the eligibility criteria, which I believe it does because
yeah, it does. I've gone to those meetings. Yeah.
What about the elevator that they are going to install?
So I don't, you know, that's a CPC question. From my understanding, I don't think it's included in what they're
It's what I meant. Okay,
doing this year.
I don't think it's included for this year.
So,
all right.
but does a municipality have the same responsibility as commercial locations where if you spend a specific amount of money, you have to bring the site up to ADA compliant, full ADA
My
compliance, meaning,
question.
you know, I believe it's a 50% rule.
Great question.
And, you know, it's what's the word? It adds up year after year. So let's say you spend $200,000 on the envelope this year, and then you upgrade, you put in an elevator next year. The 200,000 from this year, and say it's 100,000 for the elevator next year. All of that money gets lumped together, and then at some point you reach a threshold where you step over the line, and you're stuck bringing the entire site up to 100% compliance. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, where are we, and do we fall under that same ruling?
That's what I was curious about.
I don't know the answer to that. And especially when you're dealing with like a historical property, if there's a exemption there.
Yep.
But the library, you know, I did have some conversations with them beyond the envelope work, the electrical work, the fire alarm work. They have desires to do a lot more over at the library, which is related to the needs of their program and the services that they provide. I went back to them and said, separate the two things because of our financial constraints this year. And because we should be experiencing a free cash windfall next year due to the Coast Guard housing sales. And that Coast Guard housing money that we bring in next year, because it's sale of property, Allison was doing some research on this. It sounds like that money is restricted for capital items that you would otherwise need to borrow for a 5-year term or more. So in other words, you can't use, if you borrowed a large sum of money this year to do everything that the library is seeking, you wouldn't be able to use the free cash that we get from Coast Guard housing next year to pay down that debt. So to me, I said, I think you should separate the two. I think you should focus this year, because of the limited funds, focus on the core needs of the building, stopping the water infiltration, making necessary repairs from the damage that was caused by that, upgrading the electrical and the fire alarm system. Hopefully you can do all that within this budget. And then work a little bit harder over the next year on really what that next phase of improvements are based on services and the programs that you run, and seek, potentially seek free cash funding for that next year, because that's what that money can be used for. So that was my approach to the library. But really, where I kind of drew the line originally, prior to coming up with this Article 6 of taking money from last year, was we weren't going to be able to do anything. Because I really didn't want to add a debt burden to the general fund. I didn't want to borrow for the library needs through the general fund. When we came up with this idea, it gave us the ability to give that, to do $200,000 towards that like core need that the library has. And then they're going to the CPC for the other core envelope needs.
So I think it's going to be very important when Article 6 is discussed, that context, that this allows the library to do really desperately needed work with.
So I thought about that, Barbara. And Pete, you might want to do some research on this. Technically, I don't know if we can talk about that during this article.
Oh.
Because this article is only about rescinding previous money.
Oh.
I don't think you can, I feel like the discussion of an article has to be relevant to that article specifically. And you might have to, I don't know. It's a.
I tend to have to agree with you. I'm not the expert yet, but I tend to agree with you that although you're only bringing in other information to say, hey, down the road, instead of doing this, we're going to do that, or this could be potential, but I don't know.
That doesn't mean it can't be mentioned in a supporting statement from the FinCom in their book. It just might not be allowed to be talked about on the floor.
Or in our, our introductory letter, we could just have a sentence there too.
Yeah. Well, or as we read the article, we could certainly mention it, but
we'll find a way.
But not include a debate on town hall floor until you get to the other articles.
Right.
All right. Anyway, so we're only on Article 6.
Yeah, let me keep going. All right.
Thank you.
We'll come back to omnibus. Water sewer enterprise, Article 8 and 9 are typical. Article 10, 11, typical. 12 and 13 are typical. Actually, the governor filed Municipal Modernization Act legislation that would eliminate the need to vote on revolving funds on an annual basis. So hopefully that passes, and these two we don't have to do year in, year out. Article 14, OPEB. We're suggesting $25,000 of free cash to go into OPEB. We do this every year. This is part of our agreed priorities of use of free cash. Funding OPEB helps protect the town's bond rating. Typically, right next to this, you would see an article where we're putting free cash towards stabilization. Unfortunately, this year, we're unable to do that. And I'll talk more about that during the omnibus budget. But we're actually using, we had $100,000 going to stabilization, and then we got our at the last minute, we got our health insurance increase number at 18 point, almost 19% increase, which created a large deficit in our general fund budget. And so we said, well, doesn't really make sense to put money into stabilization and then have another article asking to take money out of stabilization to balance the budget. We'll just use that 100,000 to balance our budget this year. Now, that is not an approach you want to take on an annual basis.
No.
You guys know we've talked about that a million times. You don't want to use free cash to balance your operating expenses.
Right.
But like I said, I do think that once the Coast Guard housing gets developed and you bring in that new growth, this is like a bridge the gap type of year. So I don't think that's going to be an annual thing. It shouldn't be an annual thing. And the other part of that too is DOR recommends our stabilization account to be at 5% of our total budget. And we're at like 7%. We're at about 1.1 million now. So we've done a really good job over the last 5-6 years building it up, that we're at a point where we don't necessarily have to be as aggressive investing into the account. Our local goal has been to get to 10%. So I hope that we will continue to do that in future years, but I think we're safe to not put money into stabilization this year. We need it for other reasons. On the other hand, OPEB, we have to keep adding to that. That balance is like $153,000.
That was my question. 153 is 25 enough.
It is the amount we've been putting in every year for the last 5 to 6 years that DOR is, or our bond council has felt is a good rate of investment that is a beneficial effect to the bond rating. So remember, it only had $3,000 in it back in 2019. So it's grown a lot since then, but we don't want to stop putting into it. Paving is a typical article. In previous years, we've tried to use free cash to help support this article. Unfortunately, we don't have it this year. So this is a full $200,000 from borrowing. Our 5-year paving plan recommends a $300,000 investment in a paving on an annual basis in order to keep up with our 5-year plan. So we usually do 200, and then we get about 90,000 or so from Chapter 90 to add into that. 16 is the article about the DPW water truck. So if Article 6 passes, this uses 100,000 from water retained earnings for the truck.
On the truck, we've lived without a truck all these many years. Why do we suddenly need a truck, and why would we have a dedicated water truck as opposed to just putting totes and a gasoline pump in any ordinary dump truck?
My question too.
No, so this wouldn't be adding a vehicle to the fleet. It's replacing a vehicle of the fleet. And so we have mostly DPW and police are on a fleet schedule. So
yes.
Based on how long those trucks last and replacing one piece of equipment per year so that we don't run into a situation where we have to replace 2 or 3 in a given year. So it's about keeping on pace with that schedule is a better financial approach for the town.
This is something that we've talked about at least for the last 2 or 3 years. And I was the liaison with Zach and Tony, so I know probably a little bit more, but yeah, we have so many different types of vehicles, and it's almost like, Tony, I think it gets confusing when you say a water truck. Like we talk about a backhoe and a water truck and a plow truck and a this truck and a that truck. But just so everybody knows, there definitely has been a concerted effort and planning in all of these trucks that we ask for. It's kind of like, you know, uh, it's like anybody else. You and your wife both have a car. One car gets to a certain point and you replace it. In most cases, you don't replace both your cars the same year because it's a big financial hit. So what the DPW has been doing in town, and I think we do it with the police department as well, and even the fire department to some extent, is that we're rotating and replacing these. We're replacing a truck every year, essentially, or a piece of equipment every year, and it's part of that ongoing schedule. So this is for, for all practical purposes, this is just another thing that we're buying to keep our fleet in a good situation, so that all of a sudden we don't have to replace 3 trucks in 1 year.
Yeah, this is a small dump truck. And the one that we're replacing, is you can see it. It's been parked in the DPW yard, for the last couple months now. The old dump bed on it rotted out so thin that we had to replace it with a flatbed, and the cab itself is rotting like through the floorboards. I mean, we've gotten every ounce of use out of the truck that we're replacing, so it's not like we're jumping ahead or like it's not needed.
Right.
17 is MWRA, 0% interest loan borrowing. 18 authorizes us to use Chapter 90 highway money. 19, 20, and 21 are placeholders. I'm still working on language with legal counsel on these. 19 came from the Board of Selectmen. They are seeking to amend the charter to rename the Board of Selectmen to the Select Board. 20 is the Coast Guard housing sale. So as we talked about in the past, the 2021 article authorized 2 offerings over 2 years. We started this process in September of last year, so that brings us to September of 26. But we are currently in the second offering right now. And we know we're going to need at least one more offering. So this is to give us that authority. In my opinion, I don't think we should have a cap on how many offerings we're allowed to do. We should have the authority to do as many offerings as it takes to get these sold. On the amount of time, I'm still kind of going back and forth on that. It's hard because you don't want to ask for too little amount of time that you potentially have to come back to town meeting and ask for more time again. But you also don't want to ask for too much time that it seems like the town might slow down its progress or, be asking for that for some other alternative motive. So I'm trying to figure out what that, how many more years to ask for, but.
So, Tony, by the time we get to town meeting, you would have had a full second offering, correct?
Yes, in 2 more weeks. So we've had, quick update on Coast Guard housing.
Yeah, this is the big exciting news. In
Big.
case you didn't hear.
And Peter should turn on his screen and take a bow. So our first offering, we sold 5 out of the 6 lots. We brought in 2.4 million. We were able to pay off the 1.86 by the deadline. And we brought in a little bit extra to go towards the 1.3 that we borrowed to prepare the lot for sale. So the town, if you combine those debt burdens, it adds up to about 3.1. This week on Tuesday, we had our first offering of the second, I'm sorry, our first bid of the second offering. It was lot number 10. We awarded, the high bid came in at $610,000. And then today we had lot number 8, and the high bid came in at $605,000.
Ooh,
So
nice.
lot 10 came in $60,000 over asking. Lot 8 came in about $70,000 over asking. So 2.4 plus 1.2, we're at 3.6. You know, right now, if the two things we just awarded close, we will have all debt paid off plus about $500,000 in profit. And we still have 4 more lots to go in this round. And then we still have lot number 12 that isn't vacant yet, that will eventually be added. So that's why I say I know we're going to need another offering because, you know, lot 12 isn't included in this one. And then if any of the lots that are up for sale now don't sell, we're going to want authority to offer them up again.
And is there a way, and this this might be a question for town council, or is there a way, so when we get to town meeting, theoretically, I'm just going to put this out there, theoretically, we may only have the lot number 12 left. If everything goes great, the only thing we're going to have is lot 12. Would we be able to put in verbiage or word this such that, and I don't know what the ability is to change midstream. So let's say we get to town meeting and we only have one lot left. Do we get a friendly amendment on the floor to say we want to extend this for up to 2 years to be able to sell this final lot once things are settled? I'm only trying to think forward to say, I'm hoping for the best in that everything is sold except for that one lot. And obviously, even if the folks left tomorrow, we still have to tear it down. We may end up being able to sell it, but maybe not, you know?
Well, it's not included in the current offering.
Right.
This is the second offering, so
Oh, okay.
we're out of offerings under the previous authority as of right now.
Okay.
So
All right.
we know we're gonna need
A third
additional
offering, yeah.
offerings, even if this round goes really well, just because of lot 12.
Okay.
The question is, you know, do you want to ask for more offerings and more years? Do you want to eliminate, you know, altogether the cap on how many offerings you're allowed?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Eliminate?
Like, even if you had 2 houses left, even if you had the one with somebody in it and one other lot, or even 3 lots left, I think we would almost vote to eliminate the quote offerings and give you a timeline to say any remaining lots, you have up to, you know, well, any remaining lots should be sold as quickly as possible through as many offerings as it takes. And, you know, you need to try and do it within 2 years or something like that, or,
Right,
you know,
right.
we may be, you know, we may have to come back at town meeting in a year to say, hey, we don't think we're going to be able to, we might have to extend it another year or whatever, but hopefully we don't have to get that far.
Right, so we have, because we started in September of 24, under the authority, we have until September 26. So maybe the article is something like authorizing any amount of offerings up until 2028 or something like that.
Right.
Because we don't know, it's hard to say when lot 12 will be vacated and demolished and prepared for sale.
Right, right.
So,
But you can say that you're doing everything in your power to evict that tenant of lot 12.
yes, although I feel powerless. Housing law is, I am floored. I'm floored by the situation that we're in. I get it. I get how, tenant friendly our housing law is, and there's support for that, but, for the amount of time it's taken, it's I'm speechless at, honestly, how long it's taking.
What do our legal people say about that? Do you have anything positive?
Yeah, I mean, well, I can't say too much, but I can tell you this. It's not the amount of time that it's taken is not due to improper process of eviction. It's due to improper landlord-tenant relationship according to the law. So there was, parts of the law, like the law requires that you have an agreement, whether it be a 1 month agreement, a long-term lease, whatever it is. The town never had one with this tenant. It also requires that you have sub-metering agreements, which is, the town never felt it needed because these properties aren't sub-metered. They have individual meters. So, however, the law doesn't care that it has its own meter. It requires a sub-metering agreement. The town never did that. So it's elements related to the relation, like the legal relationship between the landlord and the tenant, that have been brought up in as like the tenant's defense against the eviction. So when you go to evict someone, the tenant's going to bring up, all these improper legal things that have occurred and use that as a way to keep them from getting evicted. So it's really about that, but I think that's about as much as I can say.
You're speechless anyway, so.
I'm just speechless at like the fact that you would think in this scenario, the eviction is not due to lack of payment or being a bad tenant or being a bad landlord. It's about a town decided that it was going to change direction and what it was going to use this property for. And there was so that coupled with it's been X amount of years, you would, I don't know, that's the part I'm speechless about. You'd think at some point a court would just look at that and say, okay, we gotta, it is what it is,
Yep.
but it isn't. Anyway, so that's what Article 20 is. Article 21 is, if you saw, we received a $3.5 million grant through FEMA for Short Beach dune mitigation. And it's at a 75% match currently. We previously borrowed or authorized, we haven't borrowed it yet, but we got authorization when we started this process for $500,000. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was a few years ago. And FEMA came back and it kept, throwing more money at this project, saying, they ended up awarding a lot more than we thought we ever would. So our match grew. So our match is 1.3. So we need authorization for the additional 800,000 to cover our commitment on the match. However, FEMA has also told us that the percentage match from FEMA could grow to 90%. So even though we are asking for authorization for this additional 800, which totals 1.3, we may not actually spend 1.3. We may spend less. So that's what this article is about. 22 CPC, and then you're going to have all the sub articles in there. 23 floodplain. We did this last year. You might remember it. The National Flood Insurance Program, they created a new model bylaw. Last year, we were notified that our local bylaw was not compliant with the new model bylaw, so we had to amend it so that we were compliant with the National Flood Insurance Program. And we submitted the language to them and they said it was good. And then after the vote, we sent it to them. They said, oh, one little thing that is still an issue. Your floodplain administrator, which in the town of Nahant, in many towns is the building commissioner, has to be called out in the bylaw, where our bylaw says the town administrator shall appoint the floodplain administrator. So they're saying you got to change that to say the building commissioner shall be the floodplain administrator. So it's one little change. That's what that's about. And then Article 24 is the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. Have you guys been keeping or paying attention to that process so far?
A little bit.
So the planning board developed a local ADU bylaw to be compliant with the new state law. They'll be having public hearings on it. Suggest you guys attend. And then they'll put together a recommendation and submit that to you before your book goes to print. I imagine they'll join you in a meeting to walk you through it all. But the idea is to have their recommendation included in your book.
Do we have a liaison to housing, or how are we keeping it?
I got appointed to that, as I understand.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, so that's the warrant. There's a few other articles that aren't on there yet that we're still kind of mulling over. I talked to you a little bit about the creation of a stormwater enterprise account. I talked to you a little bit about the creation of a capital stabilization account. So we're still working on those, and they may be added in the next couple weeks. All right, now I'm going to breeze through a quick, so really the point of this presentation that I'm about to give you is to talk about the omnibus budget and the challenges we faced. I know you guys are going to hear from each individual department, and we had to say no to a lot of requests, unfortunately, this year. So I want you guys to understand like the challenge we faced, so that you have that background as you go through your process. Again, I think that the tightness of this year's budget will experience some relief next year should the Coast Guard housing lots be developed and we get new growth coming in. I don't think all of it is going to be relieved. I mean, to be honest, when we got a 19% increase on health insurance and they told us like expect that to remain consistent for like the next 3 years, that's a huge impact to our budget. And I mean, you guys see it in your daily lives, the increase of inflation, the cost of expenses is far exceeding our revenue increase, you know, which is mostly capped at 2.5%. So I think it's more, this is kind of a bridge year because we don't have revenue coming in from rents at the Coast Guard housing, and we don't have the new growth yet. So I do think that will balance itself out, but you're still going to have this stress coming from health insurance. You're still going to have the other big impact to our budget this year was special education costs. And that's a variable on an annual basis. So it's hard to say, that won't be as bad next year or could get better. It's hard to really know. All right. So when we are building our budget, we start by figuring out what our revenues are going to be, and we divide it into those two buckets, your general fund revenue and your free cash revenue. General fund revenue is used for operating expenses, and it's generated in the same fiscal year as the expense. So we estimate how much money we're going to bring in FY26, and then at town meeting, we vote on how we're going to spend that money in FY26. And most of it is generated from property taxes and then local receipts and state aid. Free cash revenue, separate bucket. I talk about free cash like a Christmas bonus, where it's used for one-time expenses like capital investment, building up your reserves, paying additional debt. And it's generated from a prior fiscal year. So last June, when we closed fiscal year 24, we figured out how much revenue we actually brought in and how much money we actually spent. So if we said, in FY24, we estimated we were going to bring in $1 million in revenue and we brought in 1.5, there's a $500,000 surplus there. At the same time, if we said we're going to spend $1 million in FY24 and we only spent $500,000, there's another $500,000 surplus. Those two numbers combine for $1 million, and then it gets sent to DOR, they certify it, they send it back to us to vote on this year for next fiscal year. So there's like free cash actually has like a 1 fiscal year gap of when it was generated and when you use it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So here's your general fund bucket. It's combined of state aid, local receipts, and property taxes. And as you can see, we estimate that local receipts is going to go up about 60,000, and property taxes be based on 2.5% and minimal new growth is going to go up about 325. State aid went up a decent amount compared to previous years, but mostly because of charter school assessments. So state aid is it's used for Chapter 70 money, Chapter 90 money, a lot of pass-through assessments. We don't really factor it in when we're talking about how much money we have to use in the general fund moving forward, because it doesn't really come into the general fund for those uses, but it is considered a revenue. So that's why I sum up on the far right, I sum up property taxes and local revenue receipts to 385. That's really our number. That's how much more money we have compared to last year for the general fund. So when we start building our budget, we say, okay, and I should have this bracket on the left, I should have brought it down to not include the 1.2 of state aid. So I'll fix that, but you got that 13 and the 1.7 to use for your general fund. So what we start doing is we look at what are our employee contracts. That's individual or collective bargaining agreements. So that's what do we owe in salaries this upcoming year? What's our school assessments? What are we going to have to pay Swampscott? What are we going to have to pay Essex Tech? What's our special education costs? How many kids are in special education? What's that tuition cost and transportation cost going to be? Insurances. What are we going to owe in health? What are we going to owe in property liability insurance? What are we going to owe in retirement benefits? And what's our minimum amount owed in debt? And then what did the departments request? So as you start filling these items on the right with the money from the left, And if it hits 0 before you get to a certain item, you have to adjust. So special education is highlighted in yellow there because a portion of that is reimbursed with a thing called circuit breaker. So there's an alternative funding source that can cover the costs, some of the costs of special education. I think it'll reimburse you for up to 75% on tuition and up to 50% on transportation. So we go back to the school and say, how much do you think you're going to get in circuit breaker this year? Okay, let's use that to offset the cost of special education instead of paying for it out of the general fund. Right. And then if you still are, don't have enough money to do everything that the department requests came in at, you have to do a deep dive with the departments on what you requested, what is really needed versus what is a want. And annual adjustments is like a zero-based budget approach. So if we put in an extra $20,000 into their budget last year for a one-time operating expense and they used it, we're not going to just build on top of that 20. We're going to remove it and start back from 0, if that makes sense. So sometimes, you could get requests that just like build off of the previous year. Allison and I go through a deeper dive and say, really, what's the real number from 0 up? So we had to cut out a lot of wants. And the reason is, when you add up all those things we have to pay and all the things that people requested, departments requested, it added up to $17.2 million. And we only have the 16.1. So we had this gap of 1.1 that we had to solve. So that's why we went back to the school and talked to them about alternative funding sources for their expenses. And we had to go back to each department and eliminate some wants. And that's not just like, that also includes some of some stuff that is not like that just comes from the departments, like that stuff that we have put in the budget ourselves, like grant match, human resource contracting, retirement buybacks. Like we had to cut, or public health, we had to like do a deep dive analysis and figure out how much do we really need to put there. Unfortunately, we had to cut back a lot of those things. On the free cash bucket, we have $813,000, but the total free cash requests that came in totaled over $1 million. So we had a similar problem there. And when we look at free cash, what we try to prioritize is stabilization, OPEB, department capital needs. If we still have money after those 3 things, can we put it towards paying debt above our minimum and a little extra principal to pay off debt faster? And if we still have money there, what are the desires, the wants of the departments? Unfortunately, as I mentioned this year, we had to say no to stabilization, and we had to say no to we didn't have any money that we could put towards debt above our minimum. And we had to say no to a lot of department wants. And this kind of summarizes the changes in the different departments in a total. But I'll go through, I'm going to pull up the omnibus budget and we'll look at that a little bit closer. But after all that, what I wanted to show was like, we tried to share the burden across the board. So this is showing you what they requested, what we proposed for the funding, what the difference is, and a percentage of that request. So for the most part, everybody is in that mid 80 to mid 90 percentile. Assessors is skewed because of capital requests that came in that we weren't able to do. But everybody, you know, we tried to kind of share the burden across the board. All right, so that's
Tony, it would seem that the assessor would be on the revenue generating side of the equation. Could you talk to us briefly about what they were looking for and what they couldn't have?
yeah, it was the two capital requests that came in that we said no to. One was carpet in the office.
Good.
The other was a software upgrade, and it was for about $13,000. I think that it's something that we could push off a year, or if there is a unspent funds in the current fiscal year, in June, when we go to do those transfers, we could potentially transfer 13 grand in the current fiscal year to the assessor's budget to initiate the project.
Do we think there's any ROI on the software?
I asked, I didn't get a lot of detailed information about how necessary it was this year and what the benefits were of getting it, of installing it. But I felt like, unfortunately, it was just like we didn't have a lot to play with. The other big items were personnel based. The assessor, has asked many years for additional staff in the office, and we just don't have the funds to do it. So
on veterans, I see that veterans is 93% of their request. What is the veterans bucket comprised of besides wages for the
actually,
BSO?
So veterans, you'll see. Let me pull up the omnibus budget. Veterans actually is getting a like a bump compared to last year, and that is due to an increased amount of veterans that are eligible for
Property tax relief.
yes.
Oh, okay. So
And not just property tax, they get
doesn't the state kick on that?
It's like veterans benefits for reimbursement for cost of living. And so John does an analysis of who's eligible. I think we picked up, there's 2 new veterans in town that are eligible, and he projected out what the cost of those reimbursements were. And so we felt, we had to fund that. We had to fund that. So veterans actually is getting a bump compared to what they had last year. I'll show you it real quick, but the school, I want to talk about the school. That's a big one. We had to get very creative with the school this year. Let's see. Okay. Went to veterans real quick. So veterans, 2025, their total was 42,000, and it's going up to 57 this year. And most of that is in that purchase of services line item, which goes towards those reimbursements. So school, we had to get very creative with, and we worked closely with the superintendent and the chair of the school committee on. The school has a few funding sources that live outside of the general fund. One of those is preschool budget, which is funded through fees. So you have to pay a tuition fee if you want to send your kid to preschool. They're they have a healthy balance in that account. They really only use that account to pay for the salaries of the teachers. So what we did, really what we wanted to do with the school was we didn't want to go back to them and say, we can't fund you in full and we're short 100 grand. You figure it out. So we wanted to kind of come to them and say, here's how we think you can still accomplish the budget that you seek just by utilizing some alternative funding sources. So one of the big ones was circuit breaker. The other was we did an analysis of the total amount of students in the school and how many of them are in preschool, and 22% are in preschool. So we said, okay, can we number one of the teachers in the preschool gets health insurance benefits. Can we charge those health insurance benefits to the preschool account? And then number two, are there other school funded elements in the general fund that are used by the preschool, like custodian, nurse, guidance, principal, administrative? And so we use the 22% formula for many of those things. So you'll see in this budget that it looks like cuts. But it's actually just it's an offload of 22% of a salary that's going to be paid for out of the preschool budget. Does that make sense? Any questions there?
Nope.
So
I have a question. So, and this is a big deal. I'm not going to bring. So essentially, we're moving away from more. We don't actually have any public support. Well, what's the balance of public support for the preschool program, and the extent to which we're using the preschool program to support the rest of the school? See what I'm saying?
Well, I think our approach was more so not that the preschool is supporting the rest of the school, but that the preschool is contributing to the cost of the services that they get from the rest of the school.
And we hadn't been factoring that in before, is what you're saying.
Had not been.
So we had been essentially publicly supporting those. And now the preschool, which are private tuition, is going to be paying percentage of what they get.
Like a prorated percentage to services they get. Yeah. This year, our hope is that we get away from that again in the future years, or, maybe it makes sense to continue that type of approach.
Yeah, as someone who does preschool policy, I did that for a living for years, wrote about, etc. I think it's important not to make this be a permanent change, at least to have it be something that's discussed. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep. So
that's just a request on my part because of
the issue we faced with the school was this highlighted box. The budget they came to us with requested a $396,000 increase over last year.
Mm-hmm.
And if you remember the slides that I showed you before, we only had $350 something thousand more than last year for everything.
Right.
So it was just like you couldn't give it all to the school. We wouldn't have any money to do insurance and those other things. We would have been talking about potentially, cuts to other departments and services.
No, I understand the need this year, Tony. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is I'm just hoping that this will be something that if we get growth, other ways in which there's budget growth in the future, that this can just be something that gets discussed.
Yeah.
That's
I,
all I'm saying.
in speaking with the superintendent and the chairwoman of the school committee, they found that the method we provided them was sound. They
Good.
said, okay, this actually makes sense. The preschool is a benefit. It's an added benefit. It's paid for by fees. But it does draw costs from our publicly supported budget.
Of
And,
course.
and so they said, okay, it seems like a fair approach now, but that 22% is based on this year's enrollment.
So it'll come up again anyway because of possible enrollment changes.
Right, that 22% could change.
Right. Got
Next
it.
year there could only be 20%, or there could be 30%, so it could change.
So
Got it.
if I can ask, it sounds like absent this change, the preschool is generally generating a surplus and there's a surplus balance. So
Yeah.
this 22% formula, what percentage of this year's surplus is that using up? Is it more or less than this year's surplus? My guess is there's more than 1 year's surplus balance sitting there.
Yeah, it's multiple years. I don't think
Yeah.
they've, outside of paying the preschool teachers' salaries, I don't think they've used the preschool account for much. So what I asked the school to do is to basically do a financial forecast on the preschool budget, because I didn't want to dip into it if it meant some negative effect to the preschool account in future years.
That's what I wanted to hear you say. Great.
So they looked at, the balance today, and they calculated how many students and, what their tuition is going to be, and their anticipated balance at the end of this year is 276. And this is the breakdown in yellow of how much costs we're moving off of the general fund to the preschool,
The 22%.
which adds up to 108 721. So after using that, their balance at the end, at the beginning of 2025, 2026 will be 167 447.
Sorry, and what did it start with at the top? 219. So
219.
19.
So your allocation is using more than this year's surplus.
That our allocation is more.
So this year
surplus.
it's starting at 219. It
Yeah.
would have otherwise generated a surplus, but you're going to take an allocation, and it's going to end at 160.
Right.
So you're using all of the annual surplus plus.
Yes, because these numbers on the right are if the same kids were to go to preschool next year for the same amount of services and costs, and fees didn't get increased, after using that, the balance would be 211. So it doesn't replenish back to, yeah, I guess you're right, Tim, is what you're saying is we're using more than what it generates in a given year.
Right. So the idea is if this were maintained at this status quo, this would burn up their surplus in like 4 or 5 years.
I guess so, unless they increase fees or we reduce the draw.
Right. No,
I guess, yeah.
But this answers the question. I just wanted to know. So
Yep.
it's using more than a year's worth.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But
Thank
it
you,
also
Tim. I
means
think
that-
it's important. It's very important to keep that in mind.
It also means they have been running this preschool program that when you factor in all the costs, meaning that the amount that the town has been contributing but not charging, it's been running at a loss.
Yeah, so it looks like their expenses, what they were paying for out of the preschool budget prior was around 155. And they're bringing in 211. But the true cost, if you were to do an analysis of the true cost of the services being provided to them, you add 108 to that.
And see, I'd like to see that as being public support for preschool education.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it has been, right?
Right.
So,
and I think that's important, and I want to keep that in mind going
Yeah.
forward in terms of what Tim said about sort of
Yep.
diminishing public support. I want to keep us thinking about the importance of public support for preschool education. It's an important policy. to
it
think about.
is. It is.
Well,
There's layers to it,
Oh, yes.
because, there's other draws on the general fund,
Right.
from outside of the preschool. And as the school, who will make a very good argument, as they have to me, I'm sure they will to you, is that they need more. They're losing kids to charter schools in grade 4, 5, and 6, and they want to retain those students. They want to keep kids in the school, and so they actually gave us two budgets. The first budget, which we felt we couldn't even fully fund that, but the other budget included an additional not special ed, but like a special teacher that could help with math and science for kids who don't necessarily qualify for special ed but need that additional assistance. And it's a compelling argument. My heart, felt for it. It just was something that we really couldn't do this year. They had a guidance counselor that they made full-time and utilized their version of ARPA funds, like COVID money that was for the schools. They used that in order to make that teacher full-time. I think they're called Ezra funds. But now the Ezra funds are gone, and they want to keep that full-time guidance counselor. And we agreed they should keep the full-time guidance counselor, but that additional percentage of cost from part-time to full-time is now a new burden onto the general fund. And they also negotiated contracts this year. And, I was thrilled that they were able to negotiate a good contract that the union was willing to sign. Trust me, I lived through in Beverly. We were on strike for 20-something days. My kids don't even have February vacation because of the contract negotiations that were going on there. So I was thrilled that our school was able to get that done. But it does add a burden to the general fund, right? So this is what I'm talking about, is the expenses all across the board are just increasing at a faster rate than our revenue. So we had to get creative this year. And so the breakdown, so you'll see here, this, 18, this box here, these numbers are 22% of those salaries, 22% of utilities, right? So we heat the preschool, electrical service, telephone services. That adds up to 79,000. And then we figured out what the health insurance is for the teachers in the preschool and put that towards preschool too, which gives you the 108.
Yep, I understand the figures.
All right.
Thank you. It was the larger principle of wanting to keep public support for preschool education in mind.
I hear you. I hope it doesn't come across as if, we're not aligned there. It's just became such a financial puzzle this year.
No, I get that. And I think we're very, very, you're right, lucky that the contracts were signed and we didn't have problems that way. So that's
Um,
that's
Yeah,
excellent.
and I explained to to the superintendent and to the chairperson, like Allison and I, ever since I've been here, and Allison, we've never done a line by line analysis of the school budget. We've never been put in that position before.
Mm.
And, this year we had to do that. But, we didn't necessarily have to do it. We could have just went back to them and said, we can only give you 115,000. I know you're asking for 370. We can only give you 115. You figure it out. But we didn't want to do that. We really wanted to kind of work with them and try and figure out a way that they could still accomplish their budget, even though they're not going to get all of it from the general fund. They were appreciative of that. So some big items here, like this column AF is the dollar amount difference between what was voted last year and what we're recommending this year. So $25,000 in red, we had to get rid of our grant match. Usually we put $25,000 in this account, that if we do get a grant that requires a match in the upcoming fiscal year, we have funds to cover that match. We can't afford to do that this year.
And Tony, we are also going to have to keep in mind that given what's happening nationally in terms of education funding, potential changes, this is going to have to be something we're going to have to really be thinking about. We don't know what potential effects there may be coming.
Yeah.
Tony, you said that there's 25,000 in this year's budget for grant match for presumably things that hadn't been anticipated or hadn't been at their own separate line items. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
What have we used that for this year?
It looks like here we haven't spent any of it this year.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is that given what's happening federally, as I'm sure you're all aware, there may not be grants to match. That may be, do you see what I'm trying to say?
Mhm.
So, I mean, I'm not, never mind, but
No, it's a good point.
Yeah, no, we're all aware of things that are, the national government is doing right now, and it just could, yeah, there can definitely be some effects, good or bad.
right, that's what, thank you. Yep.
Yep. I know we're trying to keep it apolitical. I understand that, but
I'm being very straight.
Yeah, no, I get it.
I'm just saying something to think about. That's
Yes,
all.
absolutely.
Another big cut in the town administrative budget is $20,000 that we've allocated for human resource contract services. So on an annual basis, we use that. It's kind of like a purchase of services. So if we have a unique human resource related item that we have to call in our HR consultant, we pay them by the hour to help us with that. Or we used it in the past for them to do a study on our HR, and they gave us like a list of recommendations of improvements. And our hope has been to use the money to in future years to accomplish some of those improvements. We're doing a lot of that in-house now. So things like standard forms, standard packets, process, how we organize records, things like that. But again, we had to find places that we could make some cuts. So unfortunately, that's something that we're not going to be able to have next year. Let's see. I just want to look for some big items that I can call out. These things like salaries and stuff, mostly everybody is contractually obligated. For pretty much for everybody that is not, is looking at a 2.5% increase this year on salary. Let's see, any other big changes here that I want to call out? In the town clerk's budget and in your budget, you will see a little bit of an increase because we expect that we're going to need a special town meeting in the fall to deal with the 3A MBTA 3A zoning. So we had to, increase that a little bit in both your budgets for you guys to do another book, for clickers, for staffing, for the meeting. We hope that we'll be able, right now, we've budgeted this as having that special town meeting here in the town hall. But that article could, just to let you know, like that article could call for a large crowd. In which case we may need to look for a reserve fund transfer to cover the costs of potentially hosting the special town meeting elsewhere.
Where else would we host a town meeting?
There's always a tent.
Tent.
We have options. So in town, you could go to the school and use both the gym and the cafeteria. But with that comes some added costs of like, the rooms basically have to talk to each other live. You have to have a moderator in both rooms. People need to be able to like vote and talk and debate at the same time. Or we could do it under a tent like we've had done in the past down on Flash Road. But if it's in the fall, weather is an issue. And then lastly, which you also have the option by vote of the selectmen, I think, to actually, you could host a meeting outside of town limits. So you could, if you needed to, you could rent like Lynn Auditorium and host a meeting there.
How would we know ahead of time what size crowd to expect?
I think that's going to be depending on how much, I hate to say it, but how much social media talk there is, how much there is like when they do, because there's going to be a need for public hearings. And if you start having public hearings and 300-400 people show up, then town meeting is going to be packed.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Again, a lot of on police, a lot of this is contractually obligated under the salary subtotal. As you can see, there's a reduction in expense total. So we have built into his capital, we have another cruiser, but it is estimated. I think we must have done more than just a cruiser last year. Yeah, so we had, let's see, 88,000 in his capital last year. We're doing 75,000 this year. So we must have had another item. I forget what his other capital item was in it last year, but that's what I'm talking about, those annual adjustments. Actually looking back, not just basing it off of last year's, but looking back at what was needed and kind of zero-based budgeting that. Fire department. Okay, so you're going to hear from Chief Antrim. Last year, you'll remember, we did a pilot program funded with free cash on having call firefighters work a full-time shift alongside the 2 full-time firefighters. And it was extremely successful, extremely valuable. The chief came in and said, I'd like to do twice as many shifts this year. But unfortunately, with our constraints, we really couldn't do twice as many. And if we're going to do that on an annual basis, you really shouldn't be funding it with free cash. So what we did was we shifted those costs to the general fund, and we were able to do like 1.5 times what we did last year. But when you meet with Chief Antrim, he'll go through his budget and explain, how important that program was to that pilot program was to the fire department. I thought I saw him on the call earlier.
Yeah, he was.
I am on here. I'm just here to listen tonight.
All right, so
Thank you.
you'll give them that explanation when you meet with them.
Yes, absolutely.
Did I generally briefly cover it?
Yes, yeah, and I'll talk with Barbara and Dan tomorrow about it.
We're also, there's capital in here, but it's been adjusted based on, last year to this year needs. Inspectional services, you'll see a bump here. So Wayne Wilson retired. We were able to hire Brett Bennett, who is a full-time building inspector in Reading. And he is here on Fridays and then kind of on call at night during the week. What's great about having Brett is he brings this full-time professional experience from another town into Nahant. And we've already met 3 or 4 times about, his view of how the town of Nahant has done, as how it's performed, how Reading does theirs and his other experience in other towns, and kind of elevating the services and the way that the building inspector does its job. The negative, though, is, when we had Wayne, he was here every day. He was in town doing work. So he was able to do a lot of the building inspector work throughout the week. Now we only have Brett, on Fridays, really. So our hope is to hire another inspector on a stipend basis that can assist with inspections throughout the week. Keep Brett as the commissioner, but we also have with short-term rentals. Now that we license short-term rentals, we have an added need for inspections with short-term rentals as well. So we had to support some of that and the cost of the short-term rental licensing software that we're installing. But the licenses it's not a revolving account, but the license fees of short-term rentals should cover the cost of the software and inspections.
Tony, if our building inspector is working on Fridays, is that only the half day that town hall is open?
Yeah, but he's kind of doing, he doesn't work in Reading on Fridays, so he's doing inspections throughout the day, but he's usually here in town hall in the morning, getting organized, answering any questions that are on his plate, and then heading out and doing a number of inspections throughout the day.
Okay, thanks.
We also, you might recall, we also increased the fees for permits this past year. So that's part of that $60,000 estimated increase in local receipts. We hope to generate more revenue through the inspectional services department as well. See, everything here is pretty much like level funded. As I said, public health. So public health, the public health is really hourly employees. In the past, we've allocated a lot of money to public health in case they needed to work a lot of hours. And we ramped that up really like in the COVID years. So we did an analysis of like how many hours they've been working per year over the last 2 or 3. And we felt we could reduce this amount, still have enough to pay them based on their current typical number of hours, with a little bit of extra cushion on top in case we run into some public health scare that requires more hours by our folks in public health. We went through the school already. Public Works, again, a lot of this is a lot of the increases here are contractually obligated. A lot of the decreases here are looking last year, what were the requests for? Do we need them again this year, and kind of building up from zero? Snow and ice, 30,000 we're doing there again. I know that, I'm sorry, I should freeze this pane, this column, so you have like what we're actually putting into it. I like looking at this row because it kind of shows you what's the increase or decrease compared to last year. So we had a big capital item of $76,000 that we don't need in this account this upcoming year. So we must have funded for that. We must have funded a piece of equipment last year with free cash and put it into their omnibus budget. This year, we're funding it with retained earnings, so it's a separate article. It doesn't live within the omnibus. So that big decrease is basically that. The explanation of that is what I just said. Veterans, as I said, they're going up 15,000, mostly due to the added veterans that are eligible for reimbursements. Library, so this is what I was talking about earlier, where they came in with like, they requested all their capital, even the part that they were going to the CPC for. So this number is the difference between what they requested and what we gave. The reason that's so big is because a large chunk of that they're going to CPC for. And then we'll be doing the 200,000 if that Article 6 passes, we'll be giving them that. And that's not here because it's a separate article. Sailing came to
Tony,
us.
one second, back on library.
Yes.
Have they in the past, they're not in our list of presenters, like fire and police.
Oh, really? They have in the past.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted to raise. They should be in the list, shouldn't they?
Yeah, they're in culture and recreation, I think. That would be the night that they
Oh,
would.
yeah. Yep.
But didn't they ever present separate as their own library?
You probably did. You probably invited all, culture and recreation would be like them, sailing, rec, Memorial
Yeah.
Day, Council on Aging. So you probably all did them all in the same meeting.
Right, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, there's
They
not any.
they should present, they should send representatives, I assume plural.
Yeah, they should, because of the capital requests that they're going to be talking about at this year's town meeting is going to be.
Right. So which of our sessions should they be coming to talk about that?
Culture and recreation, and if you give me a minute, I'll tell you.
I can look it up online too. You sent it to us.
There's also that, how every year we have this conversation about the MAR and how they have to spend 19.5% of their total budget in order to remain certified.
Right.
Yes.
So we're still not at 19.5% in the budget. So we, similar to like the school discussion, we say to them, use your alternative state funding source to cover the difference on materials. as they have over the last X amount of years. We did a little bit more. I think they were at 18.1 or 0.2% funded out of the general fund last year. And I think this time they're like 18.3 or 18.4. So you might hear that too. You know, we'd like to be at a full 19.5%. We just say, you know, it's really based on how much you spend, not how much you're appropriated from the general fund. And they get money from the state outside of the general fund in a separate account. So we ask them to fund the difference through that alternative funding source.
No, okay, so we should resolve this before town meeting, because
Right, that's an important issue. We need to make,
and it's the 27th of March.
okay, I'm
And
the liaison, so I'll let them know.
and coincidentally, it's both community preservation and culture and recreation, so.
Right. Okay, March 27th.
Yep.
Thanks.
So on sailing came to us and said, you know, over the last couple of years, they had some incidents there that really highlighted the need to have older, mature, responsible agents, you know, working for them in the program, which coincidentally cost more in salaries and had a negative effect on their budget. They're funded somewhat part of us and somewhat funded through the fees that people, you know, pay to be part of the program. And they came to us and said, you know, that they really wanted more money from us in the operating side to cover some of those increased costs and salaries. And we, you know, again, we had to get creative with them. And I said, you know, for us, the town, like adding that burden in the operational expense is tough for us. However, they also use their outside funding source for capital needs. And free cash, we're usually a little bit more flexible. We have a little bit more flexibility on free cash. So I said, why don't we try to solve this issue by giving you capital money, and then you can use your you know, your other funding source to deal with your salary issue. And a couple other things too. We talked about you know, DPW helping them with like the, you know, on the days where it takes a lot of hours and they have to bring all the boats from the tunnels to the wharf, and then at the end of the year, the back to the tunnels. And they also talked about potentially increasing their fees, their rates as well. So you see a big increase here. I don't know if sailing would fall under culture and recreation. You might want to reach out to John Foljam, your former colleague on the committee, and have them come and talk to you about, you know, the challenges they're facing this year.
And it's funny, my daughter actually was the director of the program last year where they did increase salaries. I'm very obviously very close to it. I probably would have to, if any decisions were being made or whatever, I'd probably have to recuse myself, only because my daughter could potentially be the director again this year. That being said, I am acutely aware of the incidences that took place over the last couple of years. One of them did happen to make it on Channel 5 News or Channel 7 News, whatever, where they actually lost track of a boat with, you know, children in it. And this was a few years ago. And, you know, unfortunately, they've always run the program with younger folks, people that have come through the program. And I will say there was a definitive negative effect on COVID in the program, because what happens is they get kids in the program that are very strong fundamentally with sailing, and they train them and teach them how to be camp counselors or, you know, whatever. And these kids move up slowly through the process, and they're able to basically guide them and hone them to what they need. Unfortunately, those gap years of, I want to say it was 2 years essentially for COVID, they lost those 2 years of molding those kids. So when the kids got older, they were less trained and less proficient at the things they needed to be. So that's the kind of the why the need has arose. We didn't have these problems before with sailing because again they had that consistency and continuation of the training through the years. So I also, even before then, I also saw that there was sometimes a need for just an older person to make decisions. I remember when my daughter first became one of the counselors. She wasn't obviously the director. And it was several years ago. There was a tornadoes that had touched down in Revere. I happened to be working at home, heard it on the news, and immediately drove down. And the kids kind of they really weren't sure what they should do in the situation. So, obviously as an adult there, we got them into the Dory Club building. We started making phone calls. So there was there was always that need to have somebody who's a little bit more knowledgeable and a little bit older, but COVID really pushed them over the hump to where they definitely need, kind of a stronger leader or stronger leaders in the program. So hope that helped.
Definitely. Definitely. So we trying to help support that, but by getting creative with our funding sources, we're supporting it by alleviating the money they use out of their separate account towards capital so that they can use it more towards salaries.
Yep.
And they were receptive of that, and they did their homework. They came back with like a here's what we think we need on an annual basis. Here's how we could level it out over time. Like they did their homework. They could talk to you a lot about that. All right, let's see. So Barbara, the charter school assessments and the state aid that I was talking about earlier, this is like an alarming number, if you ask me. Our charter school assessment last year was 196. This year it went up to 359.
Oh,
So that's funded through state aid. It like passes through, but it's based on how many kids from our district are going to
I know.
schools.
And that's another thing that we should watch for, because at the federal level, there is going to be a bigger push for more charters.
Mm-hmm.
And that could have an impact.
One of these days, I got to sit down with you and over some coffee, and you got to help me understand that charter school issue.
I'd be happy to.
So is most of that charter school attendance increase at the K through 5 or K through 6, or is it middle school, high school?
It sounded like it's occurring around the 4th grade level.
Yep.
Where kids are leaving in like 4th grade.
Yeah. And what is it? KIPP Academy now is the big one in Lynn.
Yes.
And I think there's another one in Marblehead too.
Yes.
Tower.
Yes.
Well, Tower's always been there. KIPP is a newer school. I happen to know more about KIPP. There's also XL schools that are popping up all over
Yes.
East Boston. Barbara, I don't know if you're familiar with Bob Baldwin.
I don't know him, but I know that
he used to live in this town, and I'm a good friend of his, and Bob is the foremost expert at building charter schools. So if you want to build one, he's the guy you would communicate with.
Yeah.
what Patty Karras talked to us about was that may have led to some of these changes was unfortunately this past year, the YMCA suddenly withdrew from the after-school program offered by the school. And these charter schools have pretty robust after-school programs.
Very usually.
And parents, enjoy like their kids being in a program throughout the day while they're at work. So the school is prioritizing bringing back the after school program, and maybe they're doing a lot of work on trying to figure out what's the best way for them to offer that, whether it be similar to like preschool where it's done in-house and the fees are paying for the salaries, but how is it going to be structured? How, there's a lot of different things there, but they're definitely prioritizing that. They feel like that is a big factor in parents' decisions about
Sure
where
it
they
is.
send their kid to school. So retirement buyback account. So we usually fund this account. Let's see, last year we funded it at 50,000. We reduced it down to 35,000. We don't anticipate many retirements in the upcoming year. And if it overdraws, if we end up having something that we don't anticipate, we have the reserve fund transfer avenue to potentially cover those costs. Insurance, we saw some big increases in insurance. Let's see, this is total other expenses, but where's the health insurance? Oh, here we go. So 683. $159,000 more than last year. That's that health insurance. So when we got the numbers of our increase, I was like trying to organize a revolution with other town administrators. Like, let's go to Maya and threaten that we'll move to GIC or move to a different carrier to see if we can get a better rate. And what we discovered was that even GIC and other carriers are putting out the same increase in rates. So it seems like it's an industry-wide issue. So that's going to be a focus of ours internally when we go to negotiate contracts again in the upcoming year about how we could potentially restructure how we provide health insurance to our employees by looking at what the cost share is between the employee and the town, looking at premiums, deductibles, flex cards, those types of things. So it's definitely we have to get into the weeds on that, because this type of increase, when we're only bringing in additional $350,000 on an annual basis and 160,000 is going towards insurance, it leaves us pennies for everything else, right? So we're getting to the end here. Water sewer enterprise. Most of the increase in sewer enterprise is due to our Lynn Water Sewer assessment growing by about 15 grand. Most of the decrease or minimal increase in the water the water enterprise account is because of our decrease in our assessment to MWRA. That one, the DPW gets a lot of credit for. Essentially, the more work you do for preventative maintenance, seeking out leaks in the system and making those repairs, has a positive effect on your assessment in the upcoming year. So this is the result of our DPW doing a good job at proactively fixing leaks in the system. And then, let's see. Transfers out. Trash enterprise, we're getting to the end, guys. Trash enterprise, mostly the increase is due to our contract with Waste Management. And there you go. So all of your typical documents are in that Dropbox that I sent you out earlier. So you guys, when you're bored and want some light reading, you can look through those. But if you guys have thoughts and you're running out of energy tonight, if you want to email them to me, I can prepare, responses for that at our next meeting.
Good plan.
Plan. All right. Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Nope.
No,
All right. Well, in light of the hour, almost 9 o'clock, our next meeting is Wednesday, March I forget, 4th or 5th. At any rate,
Wednesday.
yeah.
Yeah, the 5th.
The 5th, I think. It's the
Yep.
Wednesday, it's not next week, but it's the Wednesday of the following week. And on that note, I think
What time?
6:30, unless there are any.
Objections.
Well, I'll have a selectman meeting that night.
oh,
Does
I
it,
think,
does it
I-
matter?
yeah, I think we're okay though. If we have Austin and the chief, the
Right.
police chief.
Yeah, that's fine. I can jump on afterwards.
Okay. All right, so motion to adjourn from someone?
I
No,
make a motion, we adjourn.
I a second.
All right, all in favor?
excuse me, I'm doing minutes such as they are. Who did the motion?
Peter?
Peter, thank you.
Peter.
And second was Barbara.
Yes,
Thank you.
All right, so quick roll call vote. Barbara,
I.
Tim,
Aye.
Deborah,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Dan,
Aye.
Melanie is out here somewhere,
I.
and Vanderslice, aye. Unanimous vote in favor. We are adjourned. Stay warm, and I'll see you on the 5th.
All righty.
Good
Great.
night.
Take care.
Thank you.
You.